Well, hey, welcome to Spicy Friday on the Rise podcast. I am grateful you're tuning in. I want to speak to you. A lot of my, not every podcast, but a lot of my podcasts, especially the Friday episodes, they're really aimed at addressing things that I think are relevant to believers, to Christians, to the church. I'll tell you why. It's because I love the church. And I think what you love produces the most passion. And so that means passion in a positive direction, but everything you care about, you will have both positive and negative feelings towards. So when you feel like someone or something you care about is really crushing it, hitting the mark, man, you're going to be thrilled, you're going to be pumped. And when something you love, you feel like really isn't hitting the mark, you're going to be frustrated and disappointed, discouraged. And so Spicy Fridays addressing kind of controversial subjects, I think that indicates what you get passionate about, indicates what you love. And so I love the church. So a lot of my spicy episodes, a lot of my controversial takes are about the church because I love the church. And that means I really get pumped when I think the church is crushing it. And I really get not even discouraged, but like, man, let's do better in various ways. So I want to talk about something that I think the church, man, we can do better at, we need to do better at, we're supposed to do better at, we're called to do better at. Here's my title: Churches can have different callings. Churches can have different callings. And let me start by saying this. Every church has a couple of things that I would almost call pillars or foundations that every church is called to do. So preach Jesus, preach that he's the one way of salvation to get in a relationship with God. Open up the scriptures, explain what God is saying in scripture and apply that to people's lives. Serve the poor, serve the people who need practical and spiritual help, and then equip people to step into their gifting. Create space for people to find community. Like there's some core things. Worship God. There's some core things that every church really needs to do, scripturally speaking. But there's this great quote from Pastor Dino Rizzo, at least that's where I heard it, where he says, it takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. So think about your city, whatever city you're listening from, watching from. Your city has tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And if you're listening to this and you go to church, you go to a church that hopefully you love, okay? And there's things that your church does that if someone else came to your church, and you love this about your church, but someone else would come to the church you go to, or the church that you're on staff at, or the church that you lead, and someone else would come and go, oh my gosh, why do they do this? This is so weird. This is so off-putting. I don't love this. And you know what that's called? That's called normal. Because if you're doing anything, there's going to be people who love it, resonate with it, really get it, get behind it, want to help move that thing forward. But on the other side of that, there's going to be people who go, hey, you know what? That's just not my thing. I don't like that. I don't really vibe with that. I don't resonate with it. And that is okay, because the things that you do, the core things that the church you're a part of does, they're perfectly designed to reach the people that they're currently reaching and people like the people that you're currently reaching. But your church, even though, I think the largest church in the country is like 75,000 people. Okay, 75,000 people. Well, we have 350 million people in America. So even a church of 75,000, that's amazing. Like, it's an incredible move of God. Well, it's not even 1%. It's not even 0.1%. So if that's true, then that means it's going to take all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. Here's my problem. Here's why this is a Spicy Friday. What we often tend to do is we find our style of church, our preference of church, our the kind of communication, the kind of pastor, the kind of whatever that we like. And then we build the idea in our brains and sometimes on our social media feeds that is how church is supposed to be done, pretending that our personal preference is a biblical conviction. And then we say anyone who does not do it like this, whatever this is for you, is either wrong or it's lesser than, or it's not what Jesus really intended. And I think that is both intellectually dishonest and it is inherently divisive. And so I get really passionate about this idea of the unity of the church. I'll tell you why. Because the church, the local church, is the hope of the world, but not just one local church, the local church, the capital. I don't even like this. It's very Christianese, but the capital C church, like the global collection of believers, tens, probably hundreds of thousands of actual individual local churches, millions of believers. Us unified is the hope of the world. And the prayer of Jesus before he died, the last prayer, he could have prayed about anything. Probably what he prayed for is really important. Here's what he prayed for. He said, Father, may these 12 that follow me currently and all the ones who follow me after them, may they be one as you and I, meaning Jesus and the Father, as they're one. God, I pray that those who follow me would be one. So that's his final prayer. And my problem is, man, so many people in their thought life about other churches, as they talk to their friends about other churches, as they post online about other churches, you would think that the type of church that they go to is the only right way to do church and everyone else is wrong. So I'll give you a couple examples. Churches that are primarily called to reach people far from God are probably going to appear showy, maybe even shallow to some people, because their efforts are, what can we do to reach people far from God? There's going to be other churches that are called to really build biblical literacy, really build a doctrinal, theological framework in the people of their church, and they're going to appear almost inaccessible to other people who might prefer a church that really does their best to reach people far from God. Those who really feel called to encourage people, leave them feeling full of faith and full of courage and full of life at the end of their service. Well, to some, that's going to appear really trite or shallow to people. But I just want to say this, just because it's not your cup of tea doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it might not be for you. Just because it's not your cup of tea doesn't mean someone else isn't really going to like it. And again, it takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. So if your church is amazing at discipling people, even just that language, like what we do is we disciple people, that's awesome. What that's probably doing is finding people who are already believers and taking them from wherever they are to a much higher level. But I think it's fair to say that if you are a strong discipling church, maybe you don't see as many salvations as another church that you might choose to look down your nose at and say, well, man, they sure see salvations and baptisms, but are they really discipling? Well, maybe they're called to reach people far from God primarily. And yes, they should be discipling people. And yes, the discipling church should be reaching people far from God. But do you see that I'm saying it is okay to have a different bent, a different calling, a different flavor, if you will? Just because it's a different flavor than your preferred one doesn't mean it's bad. So, I don't like Joel Osteen. He's too positive. I don't like Mike Todd. He's too showy. I don't like John MacArthur. He's not relevant enough. I don't like Tim Keller. He was too monotonous in his preaching. That's fine. Maybe you don't love fill in the blank. Don't go to their church. Don't stream the pod. But they're not too this or not enough that. They're just being them. And by the way, if they're not, I think God has the ability to get a hold of them. I think God has the ability to correct. And so just because it's not my flavor doesn't mean it's not someone's flavor. And so churches can have different callings. I'll give you a good example. Most relevant one is our church, okay? Name to be released soon. We feel strongly that our primary purpose and intention and the reason that God is calling us to start this church, primary, not exclusive, but primary, is to connect people who are far from God, to a life-giving relationship with Jesus. What's that mean? Does that mean we don't care about Christians growing in their faith? Absolutely, it doesn't mean that. It does not mean that at all. What it does mean is that the primary bent, the primary feel, the primary thing, like if you're looking at a whiteboard at our church, and we're talking to our team saying, hey, what's the number one win? The number one win is, are people far from God stepping into a relationship with Jesus? If people are joining groups and serving and people are growing in their faith and they're learning Bible verses and they're learning theology, but no one's getting saved, we are failing. Not because every church has to have that be their rubric, because that's what God told us to do. And churches can have different callings. So what's that mean for you? That means find a church that resonates with you. You don't have to go to every church. In fact, you can't go to every church. Find one in your local vicinity, and I really would encourage you, find one in your local vicinity. Don't just watch online. Sermons online are great. Worship experiences online are great, but I'll tell you who they're great for. If you're sick, if you are unable to leave your house for some reason, or if you truly are in a geographic region where there are no churches within 30, 45 minutes driving distance, that really resonate with you, that not only preach the gospel, but provide a vibrant, life-giving community. And there are places like that. I know people personally who live in places like that. Then church online is an awesome expression of church. But if you don't live in a place like that, find a local church that lines up with you. But just because another church in your city, in your community, or that you know about online is different doesn't mean they're bad. They might just have a different calling. And maybe that calling isn't from God. You know who probably has the ability to figure that out? Not a YouTube commenter, not a YouTube channel, not an Instagram channel, not a TikTok. I'll tell you who can figure that out. God can figure that out. I posted this on Threads recently. Everyone loves an encourager. No one wants to be around a critic. Choose your words accordingly. So I would just leave you with that. Everyone wants to be around someone who's encouraging. So be an encourager of the local church. If you hear someone start talking bad about this famous pastor or that famous pastor or this big church in your city or that church in your city, be the person that says, hey, you know what? Let's not talk like that. Jesus died to establish the local church. Even that really big church that you think is too showy, even that really small church that maybe hasn't seen a lot of salvations, but has seen so many people growing in their faith. Let's be unified. Let's realize you can have different callings. Let's be promoters of a united church. And I'll say this last thing. I talk like this a lot, and that's not because I don't have opinions or even convictions about how church should be done. I'm just going to choose to submission. I'm going to put underneath the mission my preferences and my ideas and my best practices and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to submit all that to Jesus' last prayer, his last words. Let them be unified. Let them be one like we're one. So I challenge you, let's do the same. Let's honor churches. Let's build up pastors. Let's push the body of Christ forward as a unified collective as opposed to this fragmented, divided thing. Man, I'll tell you what really reaches the world. A unified church. You know what the world can't do? Unify. They're fighting about everything. They're fighting about politics. They're fighting about sports. They're fighting about fashion. They're fighting about was Kendrick's Super Bowl performance good or not. They're fighting about everything. You know what we can show the world? Man, you can be unified if you're in Jesus. So let's step up, be unified. Churches can have different callings, but we're all a part of the same family.